Hey folks, we've got an important topic today. Maybe not the most interesting for sysadmins that love to get elbows deep into the tech, but an important topic nonetheless. And today we're going to be talking about the incident post-mortem process, right? So something happens, a server blows up, data center goes dark, a meteor hits the building, whatever, something happened, and now you need to figure out what happened, what caused it, and what can you do to prevent it from happening again, right? And how do you communicate all that stuff to the people that need to know? That is the post-mortem incident process. Now, Eric and I, we have, decades between us of experience in going through this process and different iterations and different formats with different companies. And we thought we would get on a show today and we would talk about what that looks like, the things you need to worry about, what needs to be in your post-mortem templates. So we got that and lots more in today's episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Hey everyone, it's a new week. That means it's time for another episode of SysAdmin Weekly. This is your podcast by sysadmins for sysadmins and dedicated to all the tireless tech folks out there working in the trenches day in, day out to keep the digital world spinning. As always, I'm your host, Andy Serwich, and I've got Eric Siron with me again today. How's it going, Eric?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Andy?
Doing good. Not that I don't like having you on the show. I've just said you and I have had a long stint. I think we've done like the last 10 or 12 episodes together here. So it's we've had a long run here lately. So it's been good talking about so many different IT topics, and we've had quite the breadth of different topics we've talked about here over the last 10 episodes as well. So good having you as always, my friend.
Good to be here.
Yeah, definitely. So, we've got a good show lined up today. IT processes, maybe not everyone's favorite topic, but it's an important topic for those folks in the IT trenches, especially those folks that have more structured IT departments, or you've got multiple team members. And of course, today we are talking about the incident post-mortem process. So something happened, a server blew up, a service went offline, a data center went dark, whatever. Some major thing happened. You go through the post-mortem process to figure out, right, what happened, what was root cause, what did we learn, and all the other things associated with that process, right? And that's what we're talking about on today's episode. We're going to talk through that process, why it's important, and Eric and I are going to share some tidbits of information that have worked out well for us in our post-mortem travels over the years. So should be a good episode for us. Before we get to that, we're going to get to our usual recurring segments here. So first off, I'll start with my show plug. So again, if you are new to the show, welcome. Hope you enjoy your time here. We always have some fun intros here. We talk about news. We talk about the things that my co-host and I have been working on in the tech world over the last couple of weeks. If you're looking to get straight to the core topic of the episode, fast forward to 15, 20 minutes or so in, and that'll get you to the core topic. You can use the chapters feature if you're on YouTube and Spotify as well, too. But if you want to see all of the links associated with the show, you can go to www.sysadminweekly.com. We also have a companion newsletter that is published alongside the show. We include some useful community links, some nice tidbits of information, some personal anecdotes, even include some retro IT facts on occasion. So be sure to check that out at newsletter.sysadminweekly.com as well. So with that, we're going to get to the first of our two recurring segments, and that is our News React segment. This is the segment of the show where my co-host and I, we choose a news item that caught our eye from the last couple of weeks, and it could be enterprise tech related, or it could just be consumer tech related, or whatever, myself or the co-host wants to talk about. So Eric, I'm going to let you go first on this one. What's your news item for today's episode?
It's been a busy time since it hasn't even been that long since we spoke, but I had a hard time choosing one.
Yeah,
So I'm
right?
gonna start with the follow-up on a previous episode we did about the AI doom and gloom scenario, and I called out can't remember his name now, but he runs the AI at Microsoft, and
Yeah.
he'd got himself on a few headlines about saying, all the lawyers and project managers, and I can't remember, he called out a bunch of
Oh,
people
yeah.
like, yeah, their jobs are going to go away in 18 months. Well, I read a follow-up interview. I don't know if it's a follow-up interview. Someone else interviewed him, I think. And uh, I'm going to give that reporter a lot of credit because he called him out on a number of things. And typical tech bro fashion, he's never wrong. He's never been wrong. Everything is
Right,
everyone else's fault.
right,
But what he said, well, I didn't actually say their jobs would be done. I said the tasks that are part of their jobs uh, and like, okay, nobody reading it thought that. And I went back and
right.
I looked at it again and like, yeah, I kind of get that. But then going back to my earlier kind of what I had said is like, well, I guess it was just too nuanced for that, whoever. And I'm like, oh, my dude. Okay. So the thing I had been upset about him in our previous thing was like talking about jobs he's never done, doesn't know anything about, obviously didn't even talk to anyone who does those jobs before he started saying AI is gonna, do all this stuff for him. And so let's go on to. I remember this man is an executive. That's his job is to perform executive functions for his branch of the company. But he decided he's going to go be a public speaker. And so now the thing about public speaking, sir, is you're not doing slam poetry. You're not reading out of fiction. It's not up to the audience to peel back the nuance. You're doing expository interviews. It's your job to make sure you're speaking clearly to what your audience expects. And if you fail to do that, you don't blame it on the reporter. You come back and go, oops, sorry.
I was
But
wrong.
yes, so just another thing that he thinks he's an expert in that he doesn't know anything about is that. So I still think he's wrong on the whole, even if he does scale it back to, well, I just meant these little menial tasks. Like, cool. Well, again, knowing one person very intimately who does that job day in, day out, AI has not made a meaningful, positive benefit in that lawyer's life at all. So
Right.
stop. 18 months? No. How about make teams not suck? Why don't if Microsoft is all in on AI and AI is going to do everybody's jobs, why is Teams still so awful?
So I take it
Let's
I'm not the only one that has been struggling with Teams as of late.
No, it was great. We were on a meeting, we had 20 people, and you got to figure where I work, you get 20 people on a phone call, that's serious dollars,
Yeah.
right? Every
Yeah.
minute that goes by that we're not getting things done because we're fighting with Teams is lost money, especially when somebody's over there going, you know what, Zoom can do this easily.
Yeah.
And what I thought was hilarious is one guy in the call, he goes, "You know what? The best thing I've ever used Teams on is my iPad." And I'm like, "You know what that means,
Yeah.
right? Is that the developers for Teams probably are all using Apple devices. And so Windows boxes are
Probably.
probably, and this has been my complaint with a lot of developers, is they write software that either that they don't use or that they use in this narrow lane, right? And then remember that we all know who this person is who said, "We don't need testers anymore. Let's fire them all." That's what testers do is they try it out on different platforms. So you
Sure
got your
do.
developers sitting around using just one device that they like a lot. Well, the other people will catch up or what? I don't know. I don't actually know that's what happens on Teams. But when that guy said that, I'm kind of like, huh, I wonder. So yeah, so that one aside, and then more on the AI is taking everyone's job deal. Someone straight up wrote, so Oracle just did a whole, like, without accepting that they had done anything wrong thing, more like said the quiet part out loud, though, is that, yeah, AI cost us a lot of money. And so we had to fire a lot of people to recoup the dollars that we set on fire. And they were even talking about things I know that I have said and that other people had said about lost institutional knowledge that they're never going to get back. And like, if only someone had seen this coming. And I'm not here to pat myself on the back, Andy. I know we don't have a huge amount of viewership. I've heard people with a lot of viewership saying, yeah, this AI is not doing that. It's not going to save you money like that, and they've been saying it for a long time. I think one of our comments on that show said that's not how it, it's like, oh yeah, finally people, mm. So there you go.
Right. Right.
And then the final one, I'm going to stop. I realize I take a lot of time here, but
Oh, you're all good.
AMD, we did the. I talked about this on my LinkedIn thread because
Oh,
I have been like Mr. AMD since the app
this
launch,
one.
and I have a whole backstory, and maybe someday I'll tell it. But today we're going to skip it. I have a backstory. I've been pretty much like AMD first, and then if I have to, I'll use Intel um, for 25, 26 years. It's been a while. And anyway, so I say that because the next part matters. Um, AMD quietly shut off a security feature only in their consumer Ryzen chips, and it's what does it do?
Yep.
It encrypts memory
Yep.
transparently. Is what it does. Now, I did read a couple comments are like, who in the home sphere cares about this? And honestly, probably almost no one, because reading memory out of a dead chip is not something that is easy by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, and so on and so forth. But my whole thing starting from me is like that doesn't matter. The feature worked. AMD shut it off midstream.
Yep.
Didn't tell anybody. An independent researcher called them out, like, "What's this?" And then the engineers were kind of like, "I don't know. That's weird, right?" And it blew into a thing, and then under that pressure, AMD then like, well, maybe we'll just roll that back.
Yeah, I saw
You
that. I saw
know,
the news that they rolled it back. And I'm
yeah,
like,
and but no mea culpa. If they had done that, that would have helped me a lot. Like, yeah, that was a bad idea. They don't have to get real, like they don't have to grovel or anything like that. But just some oops would be nice. But there was no oops. It was just like, eh,
yeah,
we're not going to do that.
yeah,
So, and the point I had wanted to make on that is how that burns a lot of trust. Because, like, if I buy a car, I can open the car up and I can look and see it's got 6 cylinders in it, and I understand more or less how they work and so on and so forth, and I could tear it apart and kinda if they say, "We sold you a 3.5 liter," I actually have the ability to measure the displacement. I know how to do that. Not something I probably would do, but it's reasonably easily done,
yeah,
right? If
yep,
somebody sells you something in a miniaturized package like this, how many transistors are on that little? Because most of the chip is the package that you buy. Most of it is not the actual chip. Most of it is the wiring to get to the
right,
pins.
yep,
So the chip itself is really itty bitty. How
yep,
many how many transistors are in those now? But what I'm getting at is there's no way for me to nope, that feature's there. I can see it, but the feature's not there.
right.
Obviously, you can't do that. So you do have to trust the manufacturer is not screwing around with you on what they sold you. And AMD just kind of just said, we might be lying to you, we might not. How do you know?
And that's the takeaway from this, right? I'm buying a processor that I assume has all the features that it lists on the documentation. It says these features are here. I'm
Yes.
going to trust the manufacturer that they are. And then via a firmware update, you switch off one of the features that I may or may not be leveraging.
Yep.
I think the big thing for me is like, okay, they're the manufacturer. If they want to turn a feature on or off, they have that ability. That said, if you are going to make that choice, AMD, I, as the consumer of that product, need to be aware of it. That way, if necessary, if you've made the business decision to take away, in this case, a security feature, um, I need to be aware of it so I can architect around it should I need to architect around it, right? That's the big thing for me is like, okay,
Mhm.
it would suck for you to turn this feature off, and it makes me unhappy that you turn this feature off. But okay, if you've decided to go that route, fine, but at least tell me about it. Don't try to be weaselly and quiet about it. That's the
Yeah.
part that really irks me. So,
And that's one angle. I'm coming from the angle that I paid for the whole chip.
yes, that's true. Yep.
This is not a piece of software or something where and I I don't wanna get some of this probably comes from my MBA background, and they explain how as a manufacturer, you set prices on things, right? And software is amazingly difficult with the models that we have used for all eternity, basically. I
Yeah.
mean, every going back to the beginning is pretty much we've all. I mean, it's more formal now, and there's proofs and all kinds of things, right? But there's a way on physical items to set a price that actually makes sense, right?
Yep.
And every, I don't want to say every, but most manufacturers work on some variation of that when they're setting prices for things. So with software, it really kind of blows up. Like it's very hard to price software correctly based on the models. Yeah, like I'm
Right.
repeating myself. I don't tend to do that. But anyway, what I'm getting here is when AMD produces a die, there is a way from that to calculate the price on it. So if they're just going, well, we're just going to silently disable this feature so that we can create artificial tiering,
Yeah.
right? That the actual cost to produce that die was identical to the one that does have it turned on. It's just an artificial tiering. That's dirty. And if I
Yeah.
remember right, that's one of the things they were basically screaming at Intel for back in the late 90s, early 2000s, that Intel was pulling that kind of nonsense. You know, if anybody who had a seller on back then knows exactly what I'm talking about,
Oh
that
yeah.
it was completely fake. They were just setting up price tiering,
Yep.
because they could, and for literally no other reason, and which again breaks the model that I was just talking about, how you correctly price items that you physically manufacture. So
Yeah.
there's just so much here to for me personally to be angry at AMD for. Like, obviously, I haven't spent so much money with AMD; it's made a hill of beans worth of difference in their models. If they'd never
Yeah.
gotten a single sale out of me, it wouldn't change anything. I get that, but also wonder people like me going, man, AMD is really they're pulling for you. They're doing this. A lot of that word of mouth is what got them here,
Yeah.
and
For sure.
they're a viable competitor for Intel because of people like me. If not me, obviously me personally doesn't matter, but and I think that's crazy that the people they chose to target were me.
Yeah. Uh, it was a weird one when I saw that, because the way I heard about it was your LinkedIn post. And so I basically said I responded in your LinkedIn post, basically what I said here, like, okay, that's icky, but yeah, it sucks that if that's what you're gonna do, I guess fine, but at least tell me about it, but anyway. But agreed. I see your point too. Like, hey, you bought the CPU with all of the stated features, which means you paid for all the stated features. You should get all the stated features, right? Yeah. So anyway. All right. My news item for this episode centers around Ubiquiti. And let me get my news item out here. Everybody knows I'm a big Ubiquiti fan. I use quite a bit of Ubiquiti gear here in the house for the home lab. And when I see CVEs pop up, common vulnerabilities and exposures, for those people that may not be familiar with that, when I see vulnerabilities pop up for Ubiquiti, I usually perk up. And I wanted to mention this one because I realize there may be listeners of the show that also use Ubiquiti. These are 3 vulnerabilities that you need to deal with, like ASAP. So CVE 2026 34908, 909, and 910. So these have all been given the maximum vulnerability score, and combined together, they essentially allow for, um, they're able to be chained to achieve full remote code execution. Um, where is it here? Remote code execution with elevated privileges on vulnerable UniFi OS devices. So think about your firewalls, especially that are remotely accessible. That's a big problem, right? So now, if you take the defaults, most of your Ubiquiti devices should have auto updated already. They released a patch very promptly back in May. So I think I was on the new version, I don't know, like 40 minutes after I heard about it, because it was already available. So, but I will put a link to a bleepingcomputer.com article in the show notes so you can check that out. Again, the 3 vulnerabilities you want to keep an eye on are CVE 2026, 34, 908, 909, and 910. So With that, real quick nerd hour segment here. This is the segment of the show where my co-host and I talk about the geeky, nerdy things that we've been working on in our spare time. And I wish I had a lot to share here, but I just don't this week. I've actually been doing quite a bit with Claude Code, trying to I shouldn't say trying, have been getting more into the agentic side of things. And I got a couple of projects in the works, but nothing that I can share definitively yet. Just I've been doing lots of Claude Code stuff lately. So I guess I've drank the Kool-Aid at this point. So I will say I am starting to see some very tangible benefits to some of the stuff that I've been building. And time savings. I think one project that I've been working on, I put the time savings at like 8 to 10 hours a week or something of that nature. So pretty good chunk of time. So anyway, that's what my nerd hour stuff has been for this particular last week or two. Eric, how about you?
Oh, I'm way quieter than you've been. Been kind of a down couple weeks for me. I'm playing
Hey,
around with Hugo still, but not with
okay.
any real gusto.
Hugo's
So,
cool. I love Hugo. One of my personal favorites because I just everybody knows I'm a big sucker for Markdown. I love Markdown. Um, and it's like, wait, I can build a website just based on Markdown. Okay,
yeah,
sold. you know,
I like it too. I think as the world has become more technical, people, I should say, not the world, but
but
you know, fewer and fewer people are still in the workplace that came to computers late in life, I guess. So I think Markdown is actually quite accessible as such
yeah,
things go. And I just discovered yesterday that power toy that lets you paste things in Markdown. I'm like, okay, I haven't played with it yet, but I just kind of saw the Chiron for it. Like, oh, wait, what's this? And I need to look at that. So,
have you ever used Pandoc?
I downloaded it.
Yep, Pandoc.
I know what
Pandoc.
you're talking about.
Yeah, Pandoc is fantastic. So I do all my authoring in Markdown, but sometimes when I hand documents off to other people or teams, they need it in docx format. Well,
Yeah.
Pandoc is fantastic in that I can just type Pandoc, the file name, dash O for output, and file name dot docx, and it just converts it in, I don't know, 3 seconds or something like that. And I have yet, I'm going to knock on my wood desk here just in case, but I have yet to see a Pandoc converted markdown file have formatting issues in Word. It just
I
works.
can't imagine that it would. Markdown is way going the other
Super
way. I
simple.
can imagine that turning into trash, but
I
you
don't know
know,
if I've tried the other way. Not
I
that
think you'd
I
be
would ever
brave, but why
want
not?
to.
Yeah, I wouldn't
So,
do it with like a legal document or something you actually care about, but it'd be
yeah.
kind of interesting to.
Well, it creates a net new file. It doesn't convert the existing one. So that way the original is still there should something terrible happen.
I was more thinking about, oh look, I'll just crap this out and Markdown, put it up on this thing, and send it over, and then they'll be like, oh no, why is that picture on the other side of the? It's
Right?
Word. It came from Word. What do you want?
Right? Don't even get me started on Word. Anyway. Well, what do you think, Eric? Should we talk about incident post-mortem processes?
Yeah, I was having fun with this.
It sounds amazing, doesn't it? Everybody wants to talk about the incident post-mortem process, right? Well,
I think everybody would like a roadmap to get through them because your first one is horrifying. Isn't
yes.
it though? I mean, I don't know
Yes.
that I actually remember my first one, but I remember my first few, and they're like, "Okay, got to do a postmortem now." I'm like, I don't, I need, I have to take the day off.
And it can be scary, especially when you are uh, like a junior engineer, right? A junior IT person,
Hmm.
because in certain organizations, and I found it's different from organization to organization, but certain organization, it can feel like a witch hunt sometimes,
Oh,
right?
absolutely, hundred
Okay,
percent,
who messed up? Who messed up? It
hundred
feels
percent.
like that in some orgs, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And so So if you're brand new to IT, you may not know what we're talking about here when I say incident postmortem. So again, I mentioned it really briefly in the intro, but again, something happens, right? Server blows up, online service goes offline, data center gets struck by a meteor, whatever, right? Something bad happens. And you and your IT team, you scramble, you get everything back up and running. Everything's calm, hopefully, and now you're in that what the hell happened phase, right? What happened? What was the root cause? What things can we learn from this? How can we configure things so it doesn't happen again, or at least we lessen the chance of it happening again? These are the questions that the postmortem process are designed to deal with. And like you said, Eric, the first one can be very scary. I remember my very first one. It was back in my early MSP days. I'm trying to remember who the customer was. It was it was like a bigger customer. I just remember it was like one of our big accounts. I don't remember which one, so I can't tell you like what industry vertical or anything like that. But I just remember because it was like one of the big accounts, we had 20 people in the room, right? Anybody who touched this account in any way, shape, or form was involved. I remember sitting there like, man, this is serious. Like something bad happened. If it has that gravity to it. And but I mean, you take the ego out of it and you take the witch hunt out of it. And again, that's more of an organizational, cultural thing. And thankfully, this particular organization I was with at the time, it was not a witch hunt with them at all. It was legit. How can we make ourselves better by making sure this never happens again? Not just for this customer, but for any customer that we transact business with, right? And so I guess a good place to start here, Eric, would be like, what actually earns a postmortem, right? Like, what type of situations are we talking about? And I think to me, it's those large, how would I word it? Maybe this is more of a manufacturing term, but they call them time loss incidents, right? Where productivity was lost, meaning dollars were lost because things couldn't ship, business couldn't happen, sales couldn't be done, that type of thing, right? Anything that has a direct bottom line impact, in my opinion, is probably a good place to start in answering the what earns a postmortem. If I don't know, a SQL service stops for 2 seconds and immediately comes right back online, probably doesn't warrant a postmortem because, well, some weird SQL issue happened, but everything's fine. If you do a postmortem for every little tiny thing, you would never stop doing postmortems, right? So I don't know if you have a different steer on that, Eric, but that's kind of what my feeling is about the matter.
Yeah, I'm going to pull one sentence out of something you'd said in kind of your lead in here, and it's that a postmortem's biggest value is like long term reducing interruptions.
Yep.
So if you're going to apply a postmortem and it won't have that outcome, then it's not worth your time.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. That's a good way of looking at it as well, too. So at the end of the day, it's all about making things better and preventing that downtime, preventing that dollar loss, preventing that loss of trust, right? Like if you're a hosted service or something like that, all that type of stuff. And sometimes I just thought of this, there are some uh, industry verticals and some compliance frameworks that under certain conditions will require a postmortem of some sort. Um, they're very few and far between. I'm trying to think if it's SOX or CMMC. I've touched so many compliance frameworks over the years. I don't remember exactly which one is which. They blend together after a while, but I do know that there are some out there that will require a postmortem response for insurance companies or things like that. So another thing to think about there. And so that kind of answers the question of like, okay, what earns a postmortem? We've answered the question of what is a postmortem. I think the next question here is like, okay, who needs to be involved? And the first example I gave, there were like 20 of us in the room. I don't think all 20 of us needed to be in the room. Like I said, I think anybody who touched any of that customer's equipment was in the room, whether they were involved in the incident or not. In my particular case, I had nothing to do with the incident. Basically, something happened after hours. The on-call staff had to pick it up. I was not on call that week, so I was nowhere near this thing. Um, so I'm just, it was kind of a weird one. It was nice that that was my first one because I could just kind of sit back and watch the process play out, and just kind of say, oh, no, it wasn't me. I haven't touched this customer in 2.5 months or whatever type of thing. But that was a perfect example of like, okay, I didn't need to be in the room, right? Because I just could have read the after incident report and gleaned the same value for myself in my job role as, the couple of hours it took sitting in the room analyzing this thing. Um, and so I think when it comes down to it, the people who touch the incident, it's the people who own the systems. So in this particular case, like I said, it was a larger customer, so they had some of their own IT staff. So those IT staff members were there because they're experts on their system, and we're the outside provider providing assistance with certain things. So they owned the systems, therefore they needed to be at the table. And I find that after having done a number of postmortems over the 24 years I've been in this industry, it helps to have somebody there who, I don't think you necessarily have to be trained, but somebody needs to drive the process, right? And the organization I did the most with, this big MSP I spent a lot of my early IT years with, I feel like they did a really good job in that the post-mortem process would actually be run by a project manager. And so it's a very, they're that type of person. They're not necessarily technical, but they're very process oriented, right? So
Mhm.
all the check boxes got checked. All the people that needed to be involved were involved. I feel like because that person was driving the process, we didn't miss any of the steps or the little nuances or communication touch points in the middle. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that as well too, because yes, we need to have the people involved in the meeting, but someone needs to own that process too, right? And it could be the same person, right? Maybe you're the IT director, you were involved, but you also drive that process. But I think, like I said, that role needs to be defined um, in your process. And so, just looking at my notes here.
And while
Um,
you're doing that, so let's also keep this scaled for everybody. So, like, my
yes,
first couple postmortems were just me, and then I wrote a summary to provide my bosses.
yeah, that's
So,
true. That's a good example.
what you're talking about is like when a major service goes down, and like you, from the perspective of an MSP, you're probably at some point like it's down. So this client probably has some remedies under a service level agreement that they had with with their their MSP being you.
Yep, yep,
So there is going to be some of what do we need to tell the customer and make the whole SLA agreement work out.
yep.
Uh,
Very
I
true.
have not. I don't know that I have ever had to do that in that perspective. I believe all of my, postmortems came from not an SLA standpoint, but from a more of an internal so still kind of around the same thing, like a service was broken to, an internal customer who's like, "What's going on? What happened?
Right, right,
How do you make me feel better that it's not gonna happen again?" So on and so
right.
forth, perspective, and sometimes it's just like, "Oh, that domain controller went down and nobody could log in for a little bit," and so the boss is like, "What's up? What's going on here?" So I do a postmortem for one person, basically.
Yeah,
Like, "Oh, it's a glitch, somebody saw it and they had questions." So there's scales to this.
there
I
are.
would not bring a PM on something like the latter thing, but,
No, for sure.
obviously, like, working at a hospital if our entire, electronic medical records breaks for 20 minutes, that's gonna get, the bigger more eyes, yeah, more eyes
Yep.
on it, so and there's
I'd
another
say,
lesson there too, is make sure your scale's appropriate when you're thinking of a postmortem. I think there's a good question, how many people do need to be there? And you've kinda been giving us the forest version of it, or the
yep,
trees version of it, so here's the forest question. How many people need to be here before it's just a waste?
yep.
So And I wasn't there for years, the one that you're talking about. I can say sometimes there are political reasons to have other people in the room. You get that looking over the shoulder thing, that sort of visibility. So a lot of times postmortems are done from like my perspective in the dark is, and they say this a lot in political commentary where they're judging someone else who basically effectively says we investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing. So
Right.
there could be value in postmortems of having, like when it's a big one, of having somebody there who's not, you know, so you can,
Yeah,
because I
that's
could see myself coming back going, Andy, I don't really know that what that guy was talking about. Can you explain that to me? What he was doing
that's
and what he was saying. So there, and again, these aren't the small postmortems that stuff like that's going to happen
yeah,
on, but the bigger ones where you get a lot of people involved and internal politics are just as nasty as, government politics. So
that's true. I'm glad you mentioned that because I've never thought about that particular case from that perspective. Because I think any of the engineers in this particular org that were involved with that customer regularly, I think were in that room, whether we were involved or not. Because I wasn't the only one that was in that room and not involved. There were, I think, one or two others. And so maybe it was that visibility thing, right? Like we understand that environment. And so if, again, if there's politics at play, we have knowledge of the customer, the environment, the users. I could see that. That's a good point.
yep, and it could just be you got invited because you're in a group, and because I have a bunch
Yeah.
of those. It's like we want you to show up for this. I'm like, okay. So yeah,
And that's the other reason I wanted to have you on this particular topic is because admittedly my view of this process is very SLA driven. And if again you're junior in the industry, you don't know what SLA means, it stands for service level agreement. It means that when something happens, we will have at least a response by 30 minutes from now, or an hour, or 2 hours, whatever is agreed upon between the two parties, right? And typically, especially from an MSP perspective, a service provider perspective, if the SLA is not meant, it means there'll be some sort of financial remuneration involved then. Like, oh, you didn't meet your SLA, and because of that, we lost X amount of business. Yeah, we're going to pay you 50% on our next payment to you or whatever, right? That's for the accounting people to sort out, but that's the general idea. And so when I look at this particular process, it's very much from an SLA perspective. And you bring up the points, where you're on that internal IT team. A postmortem literally might be one or two people, and that's enough for a given situation. Your domain controller example, for example. So I'm glad you've got that perspective to add here, because definitely postmortem is a very um, there's a wide possible scope depending on your organization. So, um, glad you brought that up.
and I want the
Um,
people here that are working in the small places because you need to learn how to do this in baby steps, so that you know maybe you're going to work in these small orgs for the rest of your life, and that's fine. I don't care. But if you're like, well, this is my stepping stone, I want to get into a Fortune 500, Fortune 50, whatever, you want to get in those big companies, you will need to know how to participate in the postmortem. So you don't want to walk in cold. Maybe at some point you're going to have your first time, whatever. I mean,
right.
nobody's really prepared for their first all hands on deck, 60 people postmortem. Nothing can really tell you what that's going to be like. But having practiced on small things, like we're going to talk about in this episode, 100% do that. You need to know how to do that.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. The other thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned here before moving on to the information gathering phase, I kind of alluded to it already, is that some postmortems in some organizations, not every, but some organizations, it feels like there's this whole we're searching for blame. We're trying to figure out who messed up. And in some cases, somebody legitimately messed up. And you know what? That's okay, right? People make mistakes. The one I always think about is I don't know, it was last year or the year before, there was an Amazon engineer who took down the entire US Eastern U.S. AWS infrastructure because they used backslash instead of a forward slash or something like that. It was, something really minutely detailed like that. Sometimes people make mistakes, and this process kind of lends itself almost to feeling like we're trying to blame somebody. And that's because this process is seeking out root cause. If the root cause is because somebody put in a backslash instead of a forward slash, that feels like laying blame. But when you go through this process, what I like about it is that, let's stick with that example, right? Forward slash instead of a backslash. Okay, that's identified as the root cause. How can we change that process to avoid this mistake again in the future? I don't know, Eric. I don't know about you, but for me, if I could take down an entire East Coast infrastructure by mistaking which slash I use, that process needs to be rethought. We need
Yes.
to do something differently to not depend on a backslash or a forward slash. And that
Yeah.
is something
Well,
that
you can't necessarily avoid that kind of thing.
not
It is.
always,
I think
not
people would
always.
probably be really horrified to find out how much of the things that you depend on for everything have one tiny single point of failure. It would be
Yep.
horrifying. It's one thing, like I tell people, if you trust your bank, don't ever work there. Don't get a job in IT. It's going to scare you. And a lot of industries like that. So the bigger point is, if it is that fragile, then what do you do to prevent that mistake from making
Correct.
it into production again? You can't stop people from making mistakes, but you do have ways to stop them before they hit. And some of it, like where I work, is peer reviewing. We peer review a lot of things, and said this before, and I do have a diagnosis, not TikTok, but actual psychiatrist diagnosis for ADHD, and it's always hard to explain this condition to people. It is the part of your brain that says do things that make sense. That is what is broken. So, like, I got in a hurry on something, and I was like, "I'll do this. Let me do the work." And so my boss then was my peer reviewer and came back and goes, "Typo, typo, typo." I'm like, "Oh yeah, right."
Yep.
I'm not
Yep.
stupid.
No, no.
I don't want to go around patting myself on the back, but I do know that I'm not stupid, but I do stupid things. And this is how we fix that, right?
To your
Is
point,
somebody
yeah.
else then goes back and goes, okay. And especially like in this case between my boss and I, he knows. He's more detail oriented than I am. I get a lot of work done and at a high speed, and I come up with crazy ideas that work, and those are my skills. My skills are not fine point details. And he knows that. So these are the kind of things that postmortems hopefully will say, all right, well, this guy confuses forward slash and backslash. So, okay, that happens. Cool. Peer review, or somebody comes back and checks specifically, or we run this through a regular expression engine that says you can't put a backslash there. That's not going to
Yep.
work. Something, right? That's hopefully is what it is. But we also can't ignore the fact that in some organizations, yes, they are looking for someone to blame. That's what they're doing.
And
And
some
that
aren't.
sucks.
Yes.
And I hate that for you because it's terrible. And I don't know if it's just because I'm old enough or I have done enough things that I'm pretty good now. Well, okay, hold on. Let me be careful. I can say I messed that up. And I never enjoy the taste of crow. It's not something you just get used to,
Right.
but I can do it and go forward and go, I broke that. That's my fault. I did that. Here's what I'm doing to rectify it or whatever. Right. Some people don't feel comfortable doing that. And in some places that could be your job. But
Right.
there are other places too. I remember reading a story about a guy that did like what you were talking about. And he went in, he got called into his boss's office and he's like, okay, well, I guess I'll turn in my badge now. And the guy's like, I just paid $10 million to teach you this lesson. Why would I fire you now?
Right.
So,
True.
but that's cultural and organizational, and you don't. Not everybody gets to work in a place like that. Some of them are like, yeah, we're going to fire this guy, and we're going to make a very public thing, like we found the person responsible, and they're not here anymore. So my opinion, a postmortem should, if you find the person responsible, the postmortem should not be about blame, because in my
Right.
opinion, blame is a totally useless thing. It's just not good.
Correct.
The root cause, like you've been saying all along, Andy, that's the purpose. And if it turned out to be human
Yep.
error, that's fine. Okay, we found it, right?
Yep.
Let's address how not to let that be a problem in the future. That should be what you do with this information, not let's just fire somebody. Because not only is that person gone, and whatever positives they had, like if they fire me, yeah, sure, you can bring somebody in who is more detail oriented, but what do you give up by doing that? And that's always the trade you make. Some people are worth it. Some people are like, yeah, this guy has done this thing 15 times. We have 12 processes in place to stop him from doing that. He does it anyway. And maybe at that point it is time for you need to go. Okay.
Right.
But also that person then can't turn around and go, gee, I just didn't see it coming.
Very
You know what I
true.
mean? Right.
And
So
yeah, I was just gonna say the postmortem process should be blameless, but blameless does not mean accountable. Does not mean there's no accountability,
correct.
right? And so if it is a
Right, and and
situation where
and
like,
yeah, like, going back to the whole thing I was saying about eating the crow, I still have to do the whole part of, "I messed up. Now I need to make amends." Right?
yep,
I like, it's never fun,
yeah,
but
yeah,
do it. Just grow up, be an adult, and do it. And I feel bad for people in organizations that they're just gonna fire you or
yeah,
punish you or, write it in this, the journal of things you did bad that has nothing for the things you did good balance. I get that. They're all out there, and I hate that for you guys, and I
yeah.
hope I wish the world didn't work that way, but it does. I'm
It's in
sorry. And
your
there are
permanent file.
organizations that won't do that to you. They
Yeah,
exist. So
yeah.
sorry,
It's in your
continue on.
permanent file now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are those organizations, unfortunately, um, but I mean, for good organizations, the postmortem process should be blameless, but it does not mean it's unaccountable. Because if Bob made that mistake 4 times and just made it a fifth, and we've had this conversation 4 times, like, okay, it's a different conversation now, like.
Yeah.
So anyway, so let's talk about the type of information you should gather as part of the post-mortem process, right? Something happens, okay, like you need to sit down and go through this post-mortem process. What type of information do you need? And I think for me, it's I think it's just the way my brain works. It's order of events. Now, you're going to have this process documented, right? And you're going to want to check all the check boxes on it. But one of the big things that you want to always do is timeline first. When did things started? When did people first start noticing symptoms? When was it detected? When did you realize there was a problem? When was the issue mitigated? And then when was it resolved, right? All of those point in time pieces are important. And you want to have those backed by logs and metrics if possible, right? Not all of them will be, right? Because there's certain things that it's tough to get logs on for certain things, where I'm thinking like very edge cases, because most things are logged these days, but there still are the occasional weird logs that are tough to get. But you should back those by logs if you can. Um, I mentioned a template, having a document. In the show notes, I'm actually going to put a link to a markdown post-mortem template. Feel free to grab it, use it, change it, whatever. It's a post-mortem template that I put together a while back. I put it into markdown format, added a few things about a year ago, and then posted it as a gist. But I'm putting it out on the GitHub discussions board for the show. So it'll be out there available for download. No login required. You just grab it and use it however you want it, right? So feel free. So that's all to say you should have a template that everybody knows about. Everybody knows how to fill it out. That way the postmortem process is the same every single time, right? But timeline, who's involved, what application, what system, um, um, who was impacted. The shipping team was impacted, or the accounting team, but it had the residual effect of, like, because the shipping team was impacted, the sales department started getting phone calls because stuff wasn't shipping or whatever, right? Think about all the people that were impacted by this particular incident, because sometimes, the bean counters want to be able to come up with a dollar amount impact. And in order to know that, they need to know who was impacted, right down to the person if possible. That's all the type of stuff that's gonna be involved in this. You know, I've just been going off of memory here, Eric. I don't know if there's anything you would add, but those are the big ones I know.
Sure, if I thought about it for a while, there's probably some nitpicky detail, but I kind of I like treating these things organically, right? So you have your general flow for how you're going to do it, but then as you get in there, the flexibility to kind of not do the same thing every time if
Yep.
necessary. Hope that makes some sense and answers your question. So,
Yeah, no, that covers it. That covers it. So yeah, again, be sure to check out that template in the show notes, because that's got all the different things that you might want to track, right? And so that's the information gathering phase, right? Then you're going to actually get into actually running the review. And I think a lot of this we've kind of already talked about and covered here, right? But when you sit down, you're actually having the meeting. One of the big things that we did in my MSP days that I always liked is, before anyone provided any feedback, any criticisms, asked any questions, we sat down and the timeline was reconstructed. The incident was played out. That way, nobody had any knowledge gaps of what happened. Everybody's on the same page and everybody can look at it objectively now, because everybody has all the information, right? Everybody has a copy of the postmortem documentation. And there, you can start doing things like separating root cause from contributing factors, because they're not always the same thing, right? You might have contributing factors that lead to the root cause happening. So
mhm.
it's worth separating those out inside of your postmortem documentation. And this is the thing that in my very early years, I often had to stop myself and give a second look, but resist the urge to stop the process at the first thing that looks like fault, right? Always, because it's easy to jump to conclusions like, oh yeah, look, that log file there, that's a smoking gun. If I ever saw one, that for sure was the cause of the incident. Are you sure?
Mhm.
As I got older, more experienced, I've learned to stop myself and be like, okay, it looks like it could be. How can we verify that? How can we get additional confirmation that that was root cause? I think that's just good discipline, right? To not jump to the conclusion that the first thing you see is not always the root cause, and it's important to remember that.
Mhm.
Um, excuse me. I guess a couple other things I think about when actually running the review is how it's structured. I kind of laid it out, right? We'd always cover the review start to finish, or the incident start to finish at first, and then we would open it up for discussion, right? Who has thoughts, right? Who has questions? And usually, as part of that open discussion, you start poking holes in what happened, what might it be. And I often found that more often than not, root cause was usually agreed upon by the end of that open discussion after 10 or 15 minutes, because people can ask the questions they need to ask, and we can get out the log files we need to look at as a group, right? And you get that kind of what you were talking about earlier, Eric, that peer review. You get two engineers in a room that agree that this is what happened. That's a lot more powerful statement than what you were saying earlier, right? We've investigated ourselves and found found no issues, right? So you get that independent peer review. It makes the postmortem report a lot stronger in that regard. So, um, and I'm just kind of looking here at my notes. Does yeah, so this question I've seen come up. I kind of did some looking online when I was putting this outline together, around post-mortem conversations. And one question I saw come up is like, how rigid should the framework be? I think you need to have the check boxes that you need to make sure you cover. But in terms of the actual meeting, the talking it out, reviewing everything, going through the process, make sure your check boxes are checked. But I think the process should be fairly open because, in my experience, those are always the ones that I found work the best because people generally are not as afraid to speak up and add additional information. I just found it generally goes better if the process is not super, super, super rigid, right? I don't know if you've got thoughts on that, Eric, but that's kind of where I sit with that.
I don't think think any differently than you do on this one.
Yeah, I figured we'd be on the same page there. And I that brings me to my last point for this particular topic, and that is follow through. And to be honest, that's like the whole point of this process, right? Hey, something happened. We found root cause. We found all the contributing factors. We've done training. We put processes in place. We've improved brittle things, right? Now we need to follow through on it and actually do those things or use those new tools or whatever we change to prevent this from happening again. The follow through is the whole point. If there are action items like, hey, this brittle process here needs to be re-architected, 3 months down the road, if it's still the same as it was pre-incident, that's a problem, right? Some follow-up needs to happen. And that's one thing that I really liked about our process back in like I said, my MSP days is a timer would start in our ticketing system somewhere to follow up on that particular issue in 3 days, 7 days, however urgent the fix was, right? To make sure that it was being followed up on. And it was treated like a proper project at that point. But like, to your point earlier, Eric, if you're a smaller organization, it might just be something as simple as a calendar entry in Outlook, just to remind yourself to, hey, look at the domain controller, right? It might be something as simple as that. Um, to me, the follow up is the really important thing. You want to keep items from rotting, right? So when you finish that report, you need to answer things like who checks back, what happens when an action item quietly slips for 3 sprints. Hopefully it doesn't, but what happens, right? Hopefully it doesn't happen again. And again, that comes back to the whole accountability angle. But again, I'm rambling here, but I think I've covered and made my point in terms of follow through. Um, Anything you'd like to add, Eric, before we kind of wrap things up?
On that exact point, I'm not so sure. On the larger topic, what I like about what we're talking about here is this is also something I shoehorn my software vendors into, if that makes sense, and
Yep.
that the software breaks and I have I have worked tech support for a software company in the past, and I want to say I have a lot of empathy for that job. It is hard. You are you have a customer who wants answers, and you have a development team who won't talk to you. So, and you're stuck in the middle, and I get it. Um, you also get these unreal, like, well, you got to resolve every problem in 15 minutes or something. Uh, pressure's put on you to get the customer off the phone as fast as you can, so you can work with the next one. So for us out here as the customer, we run into things where it's something you had said is, oh, they found this thing in the log. That's it. That's it. That's what happened.
Yep.
And sitting here like, I assure you that wasn't it. I know that wasn't the thing. So using this kind of post-mortem thing is something like a framework you can lay out, first of all, to keep your support teams on staff, the ones that are answering to you. You're the customer, they're doing this. You can keep them kind of on target and like, okay, so this comes back to the political part a little bit too, is like, they're not right.
Right.
Flat out saying that might turn it into more of a confrontation that won't get you anywhere.
The
So,
politics. Definitely.
yeah,
Yep.
well, they're defensive now. They don't like you. You're calling them out on their nonsense. And like, and I know, Andy, you've probably been in this place a bunch of times when you're talking to somebody tech support who knows less about the product than you do, and you just kind of have to deal with them until you can get your problem escalated. So, keeping them on task with the postmortem kind of process does help. So in these cases when you're like, well, I don't think what you're looking at, that error logged in this file is correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here on my test system and I'm going to trigger the same thing that causes that, and we're going to see if that makes the system go down. And if it doesn't, so they're already nervous at that point.
Oh yeah.
Because you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to treat you like you know what you're talking about, even though I know you don't. But I'm going to treat you like you know what you're talking about, and I'm going to go do that. We'll see what happens. We're going to find out. And then, right?
Yep.
So, uh, but this making it into a process and then holding your vendors to it works, and it's gonna be more and more useful as time goes on. Because I fully like, when SaaS came out, the software as a service, everything's in the cloud, they're developing it, they're maintaining it, all this sounds great. What I've learned is they take their crummiest developers, and now they can hide all the things that don't work. The bad things that they're doing, they can hide it from you. You don't get to see it anymore, whereas when we were running everything on-prem, they've got their guys in there and they're working on it, and I'm looking over their shoulder going, "This person
Yep.
obviously doesn't know what's going on." Right? Well, SaaS, they can hide that now. So this post-mortem process that you're talking about, you apply it to these software vendors. Like, talk me through this.
Well, Eric, I appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and insights. This is one of those topics that you need to have that longevity in the industry to have seen the process a couple of times. And like you said at the very beginning of the episode, like this seems like a very scary process when you're brand new to the industry, but you go through it a couple of times and you actually find the process can be useful. Again, in most organizations, there are those organizations, unfortunately, that use it as a blame game. Hopefully, you are not at one of those folks, but I feel for you if you are. So, anyway, with that, we'll wrap up the episode here. A reminder, you can reach all of the links associated with the show at www, there we go, .sysadminweekly.com. And we do have some GitHub discussion forums out there as well, too, if you want to hop in, leave a post, chat about a couple of things. Again, that's where you'll find the download for the Postmortem Markdown template that I talked about earlier. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Other than that, stay safe out there, folks, and we will see you again next week for a future episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Stay safe out there. Have a good one.